this is the thing about the article that really drives me crazy is that like they're holding up the DEA and the DOJ as, you know, these people that had the answers and were prevented from implementing them, when in fact it's completely backward. We've always known what the solutions are. We've been prevented by law enforcement from implementing them.
You're listening to Narcotica, a podcast giving you the straight dope about drugs and the people who use them.
Hey Narcotica listeners, Zach Siegel here, broadcasting from Chicago, Illinois. I'm stoked to have Jeff Deeney on the show today, who is going to help us dissect the ideological basis of a new Washington Post investigation into how the Obama administration failed to tackle the illicit fentanyl crisis. This juicy exposé happens to be based entirely on disgruntled sources at the DEA and DOJ who truly hated the Obama administration's reformist agenda. So we, believe it or not, have some problems with the premise of this story, and we're going to be talking about the Sicario-like fantasy of supply-siders who really wish they could be unleashed to, just lock up more dealers and magically watch fentanyl disappear off the face of the planet. So we're going to unpack this juicy story on the show right now.
Nobody loves a cop, man, as much as a liberal journalist does. You know what I mean? And you know, I have ideas like why that is. You know what I mean? I think that most people that go into journalism have pretensions of themselves, being writers, above and beyond, reporters. And so they think sort of like in terms of story and narrative, and, they like gritty anecdotes and they want things to be cinematic.
They want characters. Cops are great.
Right. Characters. Characters, all over the place. And so, and cops will give you that. Most cops are characters, and most cops, talk, they're a little rough around the edges. They're gritty, and it's sort of like a crime novel, right? Like that's kind of like how I think a lot of writers think in terms of like, when they do crime reporting, that it should almost resemble crime fiction in a certain sense. And so they want to hit that narrative, that voice they want to have present in the story. And so if you want that, you got to go hang out with cops. And the thing that they don't realize, this frustrates me to no end, is that like any time that you're talking to a cop, it's political. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
It's an ideological position that you're absorbing every time you talk to a cop. Because they are essentially performing an ideological job. That's what cops are. And so it's very easy for police and law enforcement agencies to propagandize via the media, because the media is so receptive to it without realizing that it's propaganda, and very rarely steps back to make that analysis. That maybe this isn't just just information offered in good faith by somebody who has access to information experience that I don't have. I think for years, for crime reporters, like the gold standard is like, it's like the ride along. You know what I mean? Like,
right.
And this Washington Post story, they flip it around, and there is a ride along. The photos are generated through a ride along with fire responders. And so that, like, they're still kind of working from that ride along kind of mentality, but not realizing that, like, when you're riding along with a cop, you're getting that cop's perspective of that community. You're not hearing the voice of the community. You're not speaking to people who actually live there, people who experience the policing there. You're getting the cop's viewpoint. The cop is taking you places that he thinks are significant. You're just seeing the neighborhood through his eyes, and that's not a neutral position.
So, Jeff, you're coming out of the Kensington, Philadelphia harm reduction community, and I've been reading your work ever since 2012 when you were writing for The Fix, and I think so you're a social worker now, but you're based in Connecticut, right?
Yeah, we moved to New Haven. My wife's a doctor, so she
sugar mama.
Well, yeah, ain't nothing I do going to pay for the 2 kids that I got. So
you're a badass social worker at this point. Is that where you're at?
Yeah. So I mean, yeah, I've been. I mean, I guess I would start a little earlier than that and say that I'm a former drug user, and I've been in recovery for a long time now. And after I got into recovery in 2004. It took a little minute to get my life together, and then went back to work around 2006, doing sort of direct services type social work, very much at the street level, working directly with people who are experiencing homelessness, people with severe mental illnesses, people who are using drugs. I spent 6.5 years working in the criminal justice system. Which is when a lot of that stuff that I was writing for The Fix was produced. At that point, I mean, I was working mostly with like young drug sellers, hustler kids, a lot of whom work in Kensington, West Kensington, and so it kind of was going back to this neighborhood I spent a lot of time in when I was using drugs. Many years later, doing sort of service work, and then activism also, around, creating more humane conditions for drug users.
So over the years, from your perspective, how have things changed for the worse?
Look, man, anytime you bought a bag of dope on the street, you never knew exactly what you were getting. But the options used to be like, you either got heroin or you got beat. You know what I mean? And those are a relatively predictable set of options. You can navigate those in relative safety, I think, compared to this bag is all fentanyl, this bag is heroin and the heroin's weak, and then the next bag is like a fentanyl heroin mix with some horse tranquilizer thrown in it. You know what I mean? That stuff has users on the street just so turned around.
So that's what I want to talk about now. How illicit fentanyl has taken over the market, and you've witnessed this firsthand, as have I, but the way we have seen this play out is utterly at odds with the Washington Post piece headlined "The Fentanyl Failure." The subhead does a lot of work here. Despite mounting deaths and warnings, the Obama administration did not take extraordinary measures to confront an extraordinary crisis, experts say. So those experts are the DOJ and the DEA, and they're pissed off at Obama. But look, we don't think the Obama administration truly took on fentanyl in a substantial way, whether by policy or legislation. Yes, they freed up money for naloxone. They wanted to get more treatment going. They signaled that medication treatment was important. But this WAPO angle is that Obama failed because he didn't listen to the DEA and the DOJ. He didn't let them enforce hard enough. If only Rod Rosenstein could have gotten those pesky dealers. So I want to unpack, how much their version of events differs from what the knowledge on the ground is, from what you've seen, which I find to basically erase a lot of the advocacy, a lot of the work that harm reductionists have been doing on this for years.
The thing that really strikes me is that we're even still talking about this, man. You know what I mean? Look, man, in 1995, I was buying dope at 3rd and Indiana in West Kensington in Fair Hill. in the barrio in Philly. And there have probably, I would say between now and 1995, thousands, maybe tens of thousands of bodies that have been pulled off that corner, arrested, prosecuted, flipped, pursued as informants, whatever, man. You could walk up to 3rd and Indiana right now, this second, and cop dope. You know what I mean? In fact, if Chris was on, he could probably tell you what the stamp is that's selling out there. He'd probably tell you what's in the bag. You know what I mean? Because it's that corner has never stopped selling dope since the 90s up until today. It's never been shut down for any appreciable amount of time. So that's like this idea that like, the fentanyl epidemic got out of control because they wouldn't let us arrest enough people. That's just so staggeringly ahistorical and just disingenuous and propagandistic, because that's so crazy, because in every single neighborhood in Philly where drugs have been sold, tens of thousands of people have been arrested, and all that we've ever had is no interruption in supply whatsoever, and increasingly potent and unstable supply lines of drugs coming in as a result of interdiction efforts.
Didn't the price of bags also go down?
Yeah, that was crazy, and that's crazy, right? So the deal was that around 2013, 2014, there was a bag that hit the streets in Philly called Only 5. Chris actually posted a picture of it. You can still look it up on Twitter. He posted a picture of it, and we were talking about it back then, right? That the word on the street to me, that because I was working with a lot of drug users at the time, was that Only 5 was the first bag that was said to be all fentanyl. I don't know if anybody ever tested it, but it was said to be all fentanyl, and it only cost $5. So that is a huge departure from a decades old selling practice of moving dime bags being the basic unit of a dose of heroin. It cost in 1995 it cost me $10. In 2005 it cost you $10. And then suddenly in 2013, 2014, there was this bag came out, it was only $5. And to me, I couldn't, at first, I had some ideas about what that was, that because first of all, if it's pure fentanyl, I don't know that users were really, I don't know they really wanted that at that point. Like, if, I know that it packs a lot of punch, like the rush is supposed to be exquisite. I'm sure it is. But it's got no legs, as users say. It wears off, like an hour later, you're sick. That's, it's hard enough, man. Zach, you had a habit.
Yeah.
You know how this goes. I mean, it's like, it's hard enough living your life in 6-hour increments, let alone think about living it in 2-hour increments. So I think that, there was this attempt at first, I think, to see if you could undercut the market, right? To introduce the fentanyl, to sort of see how users would receive it. And, I would say that, my first thought, I back then I thought, this is it. Fentanyl's just going to eat the whole market. 5 years from now, ain't nobody going to be buying any heroin anywhere in the city of Philadelphia. But really, it kind of leveled off. It, like, users seem to prefer a mix, and in the big cities there are distributors who can still get heroin, right? I think the further you get away from the metropolises, so you have this huge OD problem up in New Hampshire. Like for instance, New Hampshire is the subject of the Washington Post article, and I think a big part of that is because they're so far away from Philly, New York, Boston, that by the time you get up there, I mean, it really is just fentanyl. I mean, there's really not many people moving heroin all the way up to these remote parts of the country. This is a theory that Chris and I have talked about recently, that he could fill you in on, in terms of his ideas, like that there are wholesalers that have more clout with people in the islands, down in Mexico, who can still sort of demand that heroin be shipped to, so that it can be mixed with fentanyl.
Well, because they don't want to kill customers, and it seems like it's just like a bad experiment gone wrong when you start introducing like carfentanil or some crazy, stupid, potent.
Right. So, well, let me say this, man. So back in I guess by this point it was like early 2015. I was running a buprenorphine maintenance group in the next neighborhood adjacent to Kensington. So it was all people just coming off the avenue to get on subs. And one of the guys in my group was, a Latin dude, old head, who'd been around. He's my age, he's been around since the 90s. User, but who sells, he's owned corners in the past. Like he's been a fairly substantial drug dealer in the past. Now he's more of a user. He's on the skids a little bit. But he can still get dope and put it on a block, from time to time. And he uses, like, he's been shooting dope for 20 years now. And so, like, this guy was telling me, he was going back and forth from, he'd take some subs some days, but then days when he would use, he's kind of dude, he'd be doing 2-3 bags at a time. And he was down the way and got offered just a nickel bag, as a sample. Like, dude, he knew, hooked him up with this sample, this nickel bag that he didn't know had fentanyl in it. And, this is a dude who's been shooting 2-3 bags at a time. Does this nickel bag and just falls out. It falls out, in the Chinese store on Kensington Avenue, wakes up, they stripped him, wakes up in his underwear, he's got no shoes on, took his watch, his wallet, and he's back in group on Monday ranting about, like, a nickel bag, a fucking nickel bag. Like, I fell out on the avenue from a $5 bag. Like, he was incredulous. Like, he just couldn't wrap his head around the fact that he caught this nickel bag that just so surpassed his tolerance that he actually fell out. And so, yeah, I think when you talk about, like, that idea of, like, an experiment gone wrong, I think that is a fairly apt description. I mean, you've got, such wide variability now in potency, from bag to bag to bag, that it's so hard to use safely nowadays. One of the ironies, I think, is when I was young, I was an IV drug user, but I got some abstinent times in my 20s. In my later 20s, I came back and I was using oxys instead of dope. And that's the irony, is that, like, oxys are the safest thing comparatively to use. It was, I may in fact owe my life to the fact that OxyContin was so widely available when I went back to using, because it was just so predictable and safe in terms of, unless you were really just using recklessly or mixing it with other, I think a lot of oxy ODs were multi-farm ODs. If you were just using oxys, like, you were pretty safe in terms of OD risk.
And I say that all the time. So, like, I got off everything around 2012, and that was before the market totally changed, and that was shortly after OxyContin was reformulated. And so, like, we're talking a lot about the demand side of this problem and just the end user, getting totally fucked over in this market transformation. But, like, back to the DEA side of this thing, the piece quotes Rod Rosenstein, the head of the DOJ, or the Assistant Attorney General, saying that, law enforcement efforts were, like, quote, declining while deaths were on the rise, and that federal drug prosecutions, per the Obama holder agenda, fell by 23%. And, what they're saying is, like, it's because we didn't prosecute enough dealers is their main gripe here. And the Washington Post is pretty much just presenting that as a fact and, like, as a given, like, oh yeah, of course you're supposed to prosecute
drug dealers during an opioid crisis. And it sounds like what you're saying is that, okay, these corners have been open for decades, and I don't know, what does prosecuting the small fish or whatever, like I don't understand like what the supply side argument is to try to disrupt the illicit fentanyl market. Like, this is a needle in a haystack kind of problem. What kind of extraordinary measures is the DEA really gonna do?
Oh, exactly right. That's the craziness of the story, is that like there was nothing the DEA was ever going to do that was ever going to move the needle on OD rates. And now the flip side of it, which I think is worth saying, is that like, you know, a lot of stuff that the Obama administration did do or did not do also did not really move the needle on that. They didn't do a very good job.
What were they doing? It was like more beds, more treatment. Was that their sort of rallying cry?
So I think if you unpack it, I think that, you know, there was a focus on doing more of stuff that doesn't work, right, for ODs, basically, you know, increasing the number of beds, you know, funneling, you know, more money to the court programs, you know, let's get more vet courts started up, you know, stuff like that. But there was some stuff that they did that I think does work. They just didn't do enough of it because the priorities were so split, even, you know, on the Obama side, between all this enforcement-based stuff that doesn't work. I mean, they did expand access to naloxone. That was good. They did expand access to MAT. They knew that, you know, having MAT, especially in environments like jails, was critical. This is sort of like the big falsehood underlying this WAPO article, right? Is that like we didn't know what to do. You know what I mean? Like nobody knew what to do. Like, man, look, this article focused on, you know, Concord, New Hampshire. Okay. Philadelphia is not Concord, New Hampshire. Okay. Philadelphia has had periodic spikes in ODs, fentanyl driven, for years. You know what I mean? Back into the 2000s. That's always been a thing in Philly. And not only that, but we've known forever, ever since heroin and jail has existed, like we have known that dudes come out of jail, they catch a bus on State Road in Philly, they ride it down to the Frankford Transportation Center, they hop on a subway, it takes them down to Kensington, Somerset, they get off, they walk down to B in Somerset, they cop a bag of dope, they go in an abandoned building, and they overdose. Like that's happened hundreds and hundreds of times over the years, going back many years. So this idea that like we didn't know that people are more susceptible for overdose coming out of jail, that's patently false. I mean, of course we knew that. I mean, it's not that fentanyl was something new and unprecedented. It took all the things that we already knew were bad and risky about heroin and just elevated it to this crisis kind of stage, right? It just maximized, you know, all. So now you're seeing more ODs of people coming out of jails. You're seeing more ODs of people coming out of detox. We know that people OD, more likely to OD when they come out of detox. So you're seeing that more because the potency of the supply has increased. And so this idea that like nobody had any ideas to put on the table is just crazy. I mean, the Obama administration put the MAT in jail solution on the table, and you know what? It only just happened in Philadelphia. We just recently got a buprenorphine program in a jail that's allowed to do inductions. You know, we've had methadone in the prison for a long time, but you have to be on a clinic when you get locked up so that they can get your last dose information. They won't induce you know, somebody on methadone in jail. So, you know, we just got that years later. Why? It wasn't Obama's fault. You know what I mean? It's because the jail is resistant to doing it. You know what I mean? And this is the thing about the article that really drives me crazy, is that like they're holding up the DEA and the DOJ as, you know, these people that had the answers and were prevented from implementing them, when in fact it's completely backwards. We've always known what the solutions are. We've been prevented by law enforcement from implementing them. You know what I mean? Like, we could have had a safe injection facility in Kensington back in 2013, 2014. We knew. I was writing about it. You can look at my story. I wrote about it in the Atlantic, in 2014, and it's 2019, and the DOJ just sued my friend in Philadelphia, who is now the executive director of the safe injection facility that wants to open up and can't, because law enforcement is putting their foot on the neck of this facility that we need. That's the stuff that is going to move the needle on overdoses. Locking up more 17-year-old kids from the barrio, who don't even know. They don't know that they're selling you fentanyl, heroin. You know what I mean? They don't know it's in the bag. They didn't bag it. They didn't cut it. They're just out in the corner moving it to you.
What you just said, Jeff, is like the exact point to take away with, is that it's this perverted inverse. It's saying that the DEA and the DOJ, they're the ones who weren't able to, enforce hard enough to tackle this problem, when really the DEA is still regulating methadone and buprenorphine in absurd ways. They're the ones suing people who want to, or threatening lawsuits to people who want to open up supervised consumption facilities. So all of these things that actually measurably impact overdose deaths, they lobby against. So I don't get how the word harm reduction or methadone or buprenorphine are not at all said once in this story. They do mention naloxone. They talk about spending money on that, and that's really important. But all those other interventions go completely absent in this story.
Yeah, let me just say this, man. Everybody knew what was going on, man. Everybody that I knew, that I was working alongside in Philly in 2014, we knew what was going on with fentanyl. We knew the supply had changed. It wasn't going back. And it was killing people left and right. We knew what we needed to do to try to stop that. We did what we could. The government in Philadelphia, the local government was on this. And I posted those receipts on Twitter. You know what I mean? 2014, they were sending me, maps of fentanyl deaths that they were making on their own. They weren't waiting for the CDC to try and come up with some kind of mapping system or surveillance system. The health department was doing it on their own. They were sending.
Chris was doing it.
Chris was doing it on his own and talking to the health department in Philly about it so that they could have that information. You know what I mean? So we knew what was going on, and we had the solutions on the table. You can't tell us that like people were slow to react. We've been pounding the table for 5 years. And this is the important thing, man. This is what pisses me off about this article. Those bodies aren't on us, man. Those bodies aren't on us. At the height of this, dude, somebody at the medical examiner's office in Philly sent me a picture. I never published it. You asked me not to publish it. It was just a picture of the medical examiner's office, just bodies, just stacked up like cordwood, man. Like you couldn't even walk. There's that many bodies stacked up in this picture. You know what I mean? And you think they didn't know what was going on? Oh, what's going on? They knew what was going on. I knew what was going on. You know what I mean? And that could have been prevented.
I think this is a good place to wrap up, because what you've been saying is really what I think a lot of people listening to our show have been feeling, and it's like their efforts, all their cries are being erased from the conversation. Unless you're, wearing a suit and walking around the marble floors of the DOJ, you're not part of the Washington Post story.
Yup. They never contacted me, and they ain't gonna contact Chris either.
Jeff Deeney, Thanks, man. Thanks for coming on the show.
All right, man.
Narcotica is an independent production by Christopher Moraff, Troy Farah, and me, Zachary Siegel. Our theme music is from Glassboy. You can follow us on Twitter at NarcoCast or check out our website, narcocast.com. If you'd like to support us, please subscribe and donate to us on patreon.com/Narcotica. We couldn't do this show without you helping and supporting us. You can also give us a rating on iTunes or wherever you listen to podcasts. It helps people find the show. Till next time.